right. So today's conversation is going to be an interview from Kishana with Olawale, who we're gonna, his nickname is Wale. So one of the things that you can also do is go ahead and start sharing your questions as the conversation starts in the Q&A. So the chat is a great place for us to network and get to know one another. And then if you want a question answered live, please do put that in the Q&A. So, all right. I'm going to go ahead and get started now, everyone. So, hello. Welcome to CareerQuest. I'm Celeste Grutman. I'm the CEO of DataQuest. We're an online experiential learning platform. We guide you step by step toward building technical and data skills. This is something that more than ever, everyone needs foundational data and programming skills to succeed. CareerQuest is hosted in partnership with Kishana Peck, CEO of Women X in Data Science. Kishana is a true trailblazer in the data and AI industry. She has over a decade of experience leading data teams across nonprofits, fintech, and advertising, and is the founder of Canada's first conference for women in data. She's got a new conference coming up actually on May 1st. And we're thrilled to have Kishana here sharing her insights and passion as the guide for this series. So as I mentioned, today we're joined by Olawale Oikoni, a data engineer at Munich Re, who works on a team modernizing insurance. He previously worked at IAEA and Sendwave, where he automated AML processes, strengthened fraud detection, and collaborated with engineering and analytics teams to reduce financial risk. He's also the co-founder of Jopa Logic, platform that simplifies food delivery, connecting customers with local restaurants, as a master's candidate in analytics at Georgia Tech. Wole is further developing his experience in AI and machine learning outside of work. Wole enjoys exploring and writing about new technologies and mentoring aspiring data professionals. He has a passion for travel and is an avid fan of Formula One and soccer. So welcome, both of you. Yeah, I'll hand the microphone over to you, Kishana.
Thank you for having us, Celeste. You have to say when a bio makes you run out of breath, it's a good bio. So I'm really excited to be talking to Wale today. Thanks for joining us, Wale.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one very great introduction. But yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited for the next hour. So.
Could we start by you walking us through your journey from early career to your current role at Munich Re?
Oh yeah, for sure. Hi everyone. I'm glad to be here. So I'd say that I've had like an interesting journey, and it has spanned a few years of, I would say, try and error. Trying different things, and being excited about. I would say that my career has mostly been following my curiosity. I follow what makes me excited, and then I follow it to the logical conclusion. And then, if I say that I'm excited about something else, I try it and see. So my career started in finance. Interesting. I started my career in finance, doing advisory and a lot of like project advisory, and doing a lot of PowerPoint and Excel work, which is kind of good to do very early in your career, right? And I think there was this deal I was on like many years ago, and for clients we needed to sort of like pull data from someplace, and that kind of like allowed me to do some kind of like Excel, SQL work. And I thought, this might actually be interesting, and part of doing that work required me to be very hands-on, taking a lot of courses. And then from there, I decided, I think I might just read more on this. And I started reading more, getting more excited about tech generally, building projects, doing. And I think back then I was not really focused on like, what technology was tech, but I was just interested, So I'm at some point I would do like some front-end projects, some back-end projects, some data projects, anything that works, right? And then that kind of like led me to the next phase, which was me getting into a startup incubator where I needed to like build a product. And then at that point I was like, okay, this might also be an opportunity for me to grow, and for me to, instead of employing engineers, for me to actually build stuff here. And I think that in that period, I, also went in and started building as well, right? Building like a product back then, building, along with my co-founders. And then, after I was done with that phase of, working on startups, then I, I was, and the startup kind of like made me go more into data because I was more focused on like the data bit of things. And then I started working, in the industry, and I did a lot of work around my previous startups around like building up a data team, building up a data warehouse, data infrastructure, and then working on AML and fraud detection type work. And then now I work in mostly in data engineering, and that's because I think my career kind of, because of where my career started in finance, I've kind of like been very much involved in finance. So over the years, I've been very much in fintechs over the years, and now I work in a relatively big company, but like still doing like very, hands-on data engineering type work. So yeah, that is sort of my story. I feel like I could take another hour if I wanted to go very in depth, but yeah.
I was about to say that is a journey. It sounds like
Yeah.
it sounds like you have also found like the unique intersection of data, finance, technology. You dabbled in different things. You've been in different worlds, larger companies, entrepreneurship. Would you say that that first Excel SQL project that you did is what sparked your interest in finding that intersection?
Yes. So I would say that at the beginning, I'm still very much excited about finance. Like, now I'm kind of like the guy that tells my friends about, like, teaches my friends about like personal finance, where to invest their money, ETF. So it's still very something I'm very much interested in. But I think back then I was someone that was just excited about computers initially. I was excited about computers, but I was like, it's just one of those things. And then when I worked on the project back then, I was like, okay, this may actually be something that people do for work, or this is something that people actually do on a day to day, and then that kind of now led me into it. And then I think over the years, I've always found how can I work at the intersection of finance and tech? Like I've always found that way to work at that intersection. And then and that's why I tell people, what are the two things? If you're excited about tech, what else are you excited about? And just combine both of them. And then you're gonna work at the intersection. So I feel like that initial project, I'm glad that I worked on it back there, led me through the spot.
And how would you say that entrepreneurship has influenced the way that you carry yourself in your data engineering career?
Um, I, so it's very interesting because I think about entrepreneurship as I think everyone has a bit of entrepreneur in them. Depending on, it just only depends on how you show it, right? So right now where I work, there's a lot of focus on being technical. But I think right now the way you grow in an organization is not just being technical, but also being valuing the business impact. And that's where like um entrepreneurship shows up, right? You're not just thinking about writing code, you're not just thinking about delivering your pipelines or writing tests, but you're thinking about the bigger picture, right? How could this be more efficient, or how could a simple solution impact the bigger goal of the company? And when you start asking those questions, then you realize, okay, maybe my entrepreneurial journey could actually influence my how I think about my day-to-day job. And that's something that's influenced me a lot, right? Sometimes when I'm thinking about solution, it might just be the simplest thing may actually be what works, because I'm thinking about how can this impact the greater good or the business at large.
hmm And pop quiz. So some people may not understand exactly what data engineers do. Would you be able to quickly summarize it and explain how it's different from like a data scientist or a data analyst role? I know there's some overlap, and I know sometimes these companies just write down whatever they want to on the job descriptions. But Wale, can you give us your best?
Okay. So the way I think about it is, um, I, and now if you think about the entire stack, like with AI, LLMs, it's just everything is all over the place. But the way I think about the stack is, if I think of it end to end, there's a part where like your data is raw, in the raw form, in not cleaned, and there's a place where your data is very accurate and ready to use. And then everyone sits on one part of the stack, right? A data analyst sits at this end, right, where they take the clean data. They might also need to do some cleaning, to be fair. Everyone does that, but takes the clean data, presents the dashboards, does a lot of presentation, dashboard, PowerPoint work, a bit of SQL here and there, to also like prepare your data. That's what I would classify as a data analyst. So your tools key to be things like dashboarding, Power BI, Tableau, SQL, some Python, depending on the organization again. A data scientist does a lot of data analyst work, depending on the organization, but more, right? So they now do things like, feature engineering, right? So for models, so they build models. Depending on the company that you work for, you may be, having like some machine learning model, supervised learning, unsupervised learning. And to pass data into those models, you need to feature engineer your data, right? So transformations and things like that. Those are what data scientists do. So they run the transformations and the feature engineerings that need to be passed into the models. And that's what the data scientist is. And then in my company, a lot of data scientists also give presentations, right? So when your model is done, I think that's where a lot of people miss it. I think after your model is done, that is it. You need to evaluate your model. You need to be sure that there's no model drift, but also you need to present your model to stakeholders, like for example, in my company, underwriters will not know what you did, right? No one wants a black box. They want to know what you did in your model. So you also need to present to people. And a lot of data scientists do that. Now to the data engineers. Those are like the guys on the back end, right? They deal with the raw data, right? And a typical day in the life of a data engineer is someone who writes, for example, a Python script to get data from a traditional from a Postgres database, for example, into a data warehouse or a data lake. And while the data is moving, there are some transformations that may need to be done. So for example, if your data is name or something, and then, and like first name, last name, and then at this where the data analyst needs to use it is just you need to do some transformation to make it full name, right? The data engineer does that, transformation and takes data to where it needs to be done. And then while they do that, they also think about scalability. How can I make it on a schedule? If I want to do this every day, can I do this every day without me going back to change the code? Can I run a schedule? Can I do this every hour? So there are tools to do those things. So the tool for a data engineer will be things like Airflow, things like Python, Databricks, for orchestration. And then on the data warehouse side, there are data lakes and BigQuery, Redshift, and things like that. So just think it as if you think about it on an end-to-end scale, the data engineer brings in the data scientist does some work, and then to make it more, to add more features to the data, and then the data analyst prepares the presentation for the stakeholders.
I always say that data engineers are like the unsung heroes.
They are the unsung heroes, yeah.
They're the unsung heroes. People don't give them the credit that is due.
Yeah, I agree. Give us our credit.
Yeah. And also with some companies with low data maturity, or even those that are looking to now do AI, but they don't have proper data infrastructure. Sometimes I would say, like, even though there's like a slight decrease in like data analysts or data scientist role, I'm actually seeing more data engineering roles pop up because those
Correct.
infrastructure builds are needed.
Yes. I think that in the time where we are now, we may actually see data engineers being more required, because when you think about when you think about even passing some kind of data into like an LLM, for example, right? You think about like even chunking your data, right? Or even thinking about a vector database, right? Those kind of roles, just like thinking if you're passing a large text of data into a database, right? You need some kind of like data engineering. I mean, anyone can learn it, but those are like the core skills of a data engineer. And then managing your vector databases and things like that are core skills of an engineer. So yeah, I think that data engineering is a very I think we might see more people getting into it in the future.
Another pop quiz. What would the top three skills you would think that a data engineer would need?
I would say that number one is when we say skills, I want to put it as not technologies, right? Because I would want to say like learn this technology and this technology, because there are a lot of technologies. There's always going to be something else.
Yeah.
But I'll say that the first thing I would say that is be very hands-on learning. So when I say hands-on learning, be the person who is able to prototype, like just test out stuff, right? Be that person that can test out things. Be able to and based on my background, what got me into data engineering was the fact that I was not scared to test out things. So there's a time in the past where I was not on a data engineering role, but I still build APIs, right? I was not going to wait for the engineers to do my work for me. I was still doing it myself, right? I was still like, I had my own microservices that I maintained. I had my own infrastructure that I set up. I was very much in the weeds. Right now I'm working as a data engineer, but I still do some infrastructure work, right? I still provision infrastructure, I still provision databases, servers, I do Terraform work. So try to be that person who is able to basically, learn quickly, so that people can rely on you. So people can rely on you. And then something else that I would say helps is pick up a lot of the basic skill sets, right? So for a data engineer, things like SQL should be kind of like a given. Things like Python should be a given. Then pick a cloud, whatever cloud,
Any cloud.
AWS, any cloud, and kind of go deep in it, right? So GCP, if you pick GCP, go deep into GCP. If you pick Azure, go deep in, but just pick one and go deep into it so that you can learn, so that you can understand the ecosystem. Because each cloud, I mean, you can always move from Azure to GCP, for example, but you understanding the Azure ecosystem and understanding the AWS ecosystem helps a lot. And that helps. And I think the third one I would say is be very action with the business, right? In tune with the business, I should say. There's a lot of time we are very technical and we don't think about, okay, how does this affect the business? And that's why in a lot of companies, data engineers are seen as like back office type people, because the business people can't see how what we're doing affects the business. Meanwhile, it's quite very important because they're not going to see their numbers on Monday if we don't work, right? So be very in tune with the business and do presentations, like speak to stakeholders about what is happening on the back end so that you are also quite visible.
Mm-hmm. And for the audience, GCP is Google Cloud. I'm not sure what the P is for.
Platform.
Platform. And the other one mentioned was Azure. So those ones, because I had to decode while you were talking. I had to be like, GCP, we're going too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the
GCP is Google, Azure is Microsoft, and AWS is Amazon.
Okay, perfect. And what kind of projects do you find yourself working on?
Yeah. Okay. So I tend to find myself working on different kinds of projects, but they tend to be around the same theme, right? ETL, moving data from one place to the other. And when I say moving data, it could be an example is let's say we have a product where a product that customers use, right? And then We have data, usually when customers use the product, data is stored in some, say, SQL Server or Postgres. And then there's some other party that needs that data for analytical purposes. Usually we don't want them to go into the live database to go like play with it, because again, it's live, right? Customers use it. And also, aside that, there's also the fact that I mean, it's live, and then we want it to be highly functional, right? We don't want to run analytical workloads on that database. So usually we try our best to, so what we do is we move that data from, where it is, to a separate place that's for analytical purposes, called an OLAP, right? And that place is more in tune and is more in tune for analytical purposes. And we tend to now create like daily jobs. Like right now on my team, we have like daily jobs that picks data from one place and takes it to a different place, right? So let's say data from our transactional database, we do some transformations. And when it comes to data modeling, right, we do like, I don't know if a lot of people know about like data modeling and architecture, about the medallion architecture, which is transforming data to different formats for the key users, right? And then we store it in a data lake, and then so other people can use it, that's the consumers. So that is what my day-to-day looks like. But it also differs, right? It could, like, sometimes we want data from a third party somewhere outside the organization, and we want to find a way to bring that data in, right? So how do we do that? And say their system is maybe more modern database like Snowflake, right? So you need to find a way to provision solutions so that you are able to pull data into your ecosystem. So my day-to-day is kind of like that, but from time to time, there are like interesting projects that kind of stretches you or makes it a bit different, or sometimes we also have third-party data. Like in my industry, we deal with a lot of third-party data, right? And you have to work with either an API from somewhere or do a lot of authentication to bring data in and do jobs. So that is sort of like what my day-to-day tends to look like.
Hmm. And I imagine as a data engineer, you guys don't really get much credit for the work that you do that allows like the data analysts or the data scientists that are presenting
Yep.
like the end products. How do you maintain that motivation and the communication with other teams since you're kind of more back of house?
Um, this is an interesting question because
But
I
I
feel
do.
like, yeah, because I feel like this is something that is, that's even present in organizations, right? Even in mine, right? Where we're like, how do we get credit for this? Um, and I think I'll just say like some things that we're starting to implement, right? And part of it is being visible, right? Being visible and sharing your work, right? Being visible means that presenting some of the things, and a lot of things that we do, we consider it not much of a big deal, right, to us, but to others, we'll be like, oh wow. So things like things as simple as, hey, we built a pipe, we built a job that that reduced the time for us to get this information from 3 days to like 30 minutes. It's like, for us, it's like, oh yeah, that's good. High fives everyone. But it's like, that is also something good to present to people, because people can see, oh, this actually, you thought a lot about the infrastructure, you thought about the underlying reason for this. And then, so presenting your work is quite important. And internally and externally. And externally, going to conferences is something that I started doing as well, right? And then when you go to a conference that's related to your industry. So for example, if you work in, say, banking, go to banking conference and present optimization that you did with data, banking data. Your insurance, go to an insurance conference. And then so that also helps to share some of the optimization that you're doing within the industry. And also, we, in terms of when we work with other teams, right, we were able to get very, into with other teams, get into their mode of work. And then when they're presenting their work, we try to, as much as possible, to be there, right? Oh, we're all in the team together. We also helped you. And then, so those are some of the things that we're starting to implement on my team so that we can be more visible to the larger team. Yeah.
And we may have some perspective or current data analysts or data scientists listening right now. What would you suggest them to do to be able to learn from and connect with the data engineers? Because there's like this myth of like a full stack like data scientist
Yeah.
and that you wouldn't need data engineers. But I always knew that was very important for my team to learn from the data engineers and know what they're doing. So what are some tips you have for them?
Okay, so this is interesting because if you're currently a data analyst, then you kind of know what's going on, right? You know that, okay, I know there are some guys who bring the data in. I know there's some guys who do like some modeling and stuff like that. So you want to figure out where you want to go next. If you're really excited about that type of stuff, then I would say on your own, if you're in an organization, it may be easy to move, right? Easy to say, I want to do more like, data engineering type work, right? That's something you could tell your manager, tell your team lead. And if they care about your growth, I think that's something that it can be orchestrated over a period of time. Another thing is work on projects. I think that's something that is very underrated. But try as much as possible to work on in personal projects on your own, but also projects within your team. So, for example, if there's a small, like, little thing that may not be necessarily data engineering, but it could be something close. It could be provisioning some kind of infrastructure, whatever. Try to be that person that wants to do that type of stuff, so that you're moving more or less away from, because I think data engineers are closer to like the infrastructure and to the DevOps people there, and I think the data analysts. So you want to try to work on projects that moves you closer there. And then pick up the tools, right? Pick up the tooling that you need. So when you think about some things that you could do is now build projects and make it live, right? Think about like a Airflow job that takes I don't know, that takes an Airflow job that takes like data, like, so there's a lot of open data right now out there, right? I was looking at something recently and it was like New York's I think New York City's bike data or something like that. You could take that kind of data, transform it and push it into somewhere else and make it a dashboard. And then that entire process makes you learn a lot, because when you're creating, you have to provision an infrastructure. You have to think about, oh, what warehouse do I want to use? Do I want to use BigQuery, right? Do I want to use do I want to use BigQuery in GCP, right? And then do I want to optimize that? Do I want to think about clustering, partitioning, and then it makes you think about a lot more when you work on even personal projects. So I would say that first, feel confident in in some of these tools, right? Airflow, Python, some SQL, and then just build stuff. And then eventually, I don't know, and there are other tools like Kafka, like Spark, those things you learn as time goes on. But the basics, kind of like, I'll say that the basics just, maybe understand like just Airflow, Python. And from there, you just grow into like, based on what you need to do. Like, do I need to stream? Maybe I go learn Kafka, do I need like distributed, am I working on distributed workload? I go learn Spark, right? But don't try to learn everything at once. Just pick like the basics and then just learn that and then build projects and then you go from there.
Great advice. I had another question that was on the
I know.
tip. Oh, one of the things that didn't come up so far is data engineers' role in security, because it seems like you guys are like the first line of defense for security and privacy as well.
Yeah.
Would you like to touch on that for us?
Oh yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of interesting, because there's been a lot of conversations around security, privacy, recently, and we come, especially, this is something that I was not very privy to until I worked, at a separate kind of company, at a bigger company, because bigger companies are, they're more public, right? They're more open to, say, like lawsuits and things like that. So there's a lot of implementation that happens within the team that requires you to be very security focused. And on a company-wide level, there's a concept called, like, there's a concept right now that's gone around data governance that requires you to think about how your data is governed. How do you assign stewardship to the data, right? So, for example, there is, in a typical company, there is, like, I don't know, like maybe 20 over a lot of rows of data, and a lot of, sorry, tables of data, and each of those tables needs to have, for example, a steward, right? Like who is in charge of, for example, who is a data steward, who is in charge of the data. And then something else that a lot of companies are starting to implement is things like data lineage, right? So when you think of a data pipeline or a workflow of data can come from, say, a user clicking submit into a database to a dashboard, right? And it could have touched a lot of places before it gets to the dashboard. And a data lineage, a data lineage is able to show the traces of where the data moved. So it went to a storage container, from there it went to a data warehouse, from there it went to a data lake, from there it went to the dashboard. And this helps so that this helps two things. First, if there's some kind of break upstream, you're able to trace that quickly, but also you're able to see where owns what, and then how your data is moving through the system. Because a lot of times you have a lot of data flows that you don't know where what is. So data governance is a very important topic. And I'll say that, like, that is something that a lot of companies are really hiring for now. Like, so if they just don't want a data engineer, but they want someone who is actually very privy to data governance, right? So, for example, right now there's an open source tool called Data Hub. It's like an open source data governance toolkit for implementing data governance within organizations. And there are other tools that are not open source, but that's like one of the top open source tools that I've seen. So yeah, it's very interesting topic. I think, like, that's something that a lot of people should look into, and see how they can implement it in your company. So currently, if you're working somewhere, and I think you can score really easy points just bringing a lot of these things up. Like, are we thinking about row level security, colonel level security, things like that. So yeah, those are very interesting conversations to have in your team.
Yeah, I was like, I need to put another point into why you guys are the unsung heroes. There's so much. You guys like protect things, you ensure there's a flow, you're doing transformations in the back that no one really thinks about, improving processes, reducing time. There's a lot of things that data engineers do. I see that you also do some mentoring of aspiring data professionals. How do you normally approach it? Because I'm sure your LinkedIn is going to blow up after this of people asking you
Oh yeah.
questions. So how do you normally approach it?
Yeah, so a bit of story. A few years ago, I was, when I worked in data for a few years, and I wanted to make my data friends. I wanted to, where are all the people in the industry, and I created a data sort of like a meetup type of thing, where, like, people just come, met people, speak. And I don't do that anymore, but I think that I still have, like, a small community of people who from there I've met, and we've grown into, like, data professionals over the years. And I'll say that my way of mentoring is, I feel like I've said this all over again, but I think that a lot of people may not. I think first things first is know what you are excited about, right? I tell people, like, if you're not excited about this thing, find something else. People are more excited about, like, different things, and when you're excited about that thing, then you go deeper into it, right? And then, so that's where it starts, and that's how I work, right? I kind of experiment. If I don't like this, I leave it. I experiment with what I like, and then I just go deep, right? Because you need that depth. You need to go deeper into one thing for a period of time, right? But don't go into many things for a period of time. Kind of like spend like a short time experimenting, and when you figure out, oh, I'm excited about this, then go deeper into it. And when going in depth means like, reading, obviously, studying, but also building projects. I'm I'm a fan of projects, real world projects, because it helps you scale up your learning quickly. You're able to think through problems. You're gonna come into issues that you've not found before, and then you try to solve it. So an example of a project, for example, could be, I just tell, like, a friend of mine worked on a project where he took a, I think he took a went out for I think an open data something for exchange rate. So he took the data, and then he posted it. He created a job to post it on Twitter every day. So he took a job that takes data from somewhere, does some cleaning, and he posts and it tweets. For you to tweet, obviously, you have to use like Twitter's. You have to go through Twitter's authentication system. So that's some level of learning that you also have to learn there, right? Taking the data, doing the transformation, and making a tweet is an interesting project. It looks simple, but you're going to learn a couple of things just doing that. And then now think about, how do you automate it? How do you make it run every day? I mean, maybe a cron job, right? But maybe like an Airflow instance, or maybe it could do different things to make it run every day. So that decision making just makes you learn a lot more. So yeah, that is something I'll tell people. And then yeah, like ask questions, like interact with like people like me, a lot of people in the industry are happy to help. I think people fear from approaching people because they think that everyone is very willing to help. And I think that's something I've done all my career. I just meet people, ask them questions, and I think you should do that too.
Hmm. What are some common misconceptions that you help aspiring data engineers overcome?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions is the fact that people think that it is, first, people think anything can be hard, right? But when people think about like the data, ecosystem, people are like, I'm just gonna be a data analyst, I'm just gonna be a data science, maybe I'll just be a data analyst, I'm fine there. But it's interesting because there are some roles where data analysts may actually act as data engineers. They might actually be pipelines. So I think that when you're thinking about your data career, don't decide that, what, oh, this is hard, I'm going to stick with the easier, right? Because usually when you stick with the easier thing, except if you're really interested in that, if that's what you're excited about, yeah, really excited about dashboarding in SQL, then do it. But if you try this other thing and thought, I think this might be hard, then maybe it's time to double down, try as much as possible to get into it, and then work on a project, work on something, read more. There are a lot of books. I've not said a lot, but there are books to read to get you to the place, on courses online. The resources are there. So don't shy away from, data engineering, and it may not be data engineering, it could be like software engineering, DevOps, whatever. But if you think it's hard, try as much as possible to go deeper into it. And then you just realize that, yeah, actually, I guess it's hard because you don't know it yet. It's hard because you don't know it at that time. But it's gonna get easy because eventually, because you now know it. And it's the same with everything, right? And like when we think about the book Atomic Habits, right? It's about small incremental progress because I don't know this now, but I read and I know it. And in the same way, like there was a time I didn't know what I knew right now. And there are tons of things I didn't know, I don't know right now, that I know that, okay, if I spend some time on it, I'm going to learn it. So just have that. I think it's also called a growth mindset. Just know that, yeah, I've not learned the totality of all the things I'm going to learn in my life. So just keep going at it.
Hmm. And with the amount of changes that are happening now with machine learning and AI, how does that impact data engineers' trajectory and work?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting question because I don't know where it is going. But you know what? I think that we still need, um, if I check the team at OpenAI right now, they still have engineers.
Mm.
There's still engineers that are building the front end. There's still engineers that are building the back end. There's still engineers that are building the infrastructure. So in as much as OpenAI is building like next level, they're trying to build AGI, they also have like people in the house building those things. So I think that your innate skill, whatever skill you have, is still something that is not gonna leave you, right? Many years ago, like when we think about tech, right? Many years, like I'm thinking about front end right now. If a lot of people are familiar with front end, many years ago, people were writing jQuery, and then that left, and then there was like Angular. Okay, that left, and then there's now React, and then things are going to evolve, right? Even with backend, right? Everyone is, backend. At some point, a lot of people are writing Ruby on Rails. At some point, a lot of people are writing, depending on the team you are, right? Technology is going to evolve, but the ability to learn new technologies is sticks with you because you can learn, you can build new projects, you can acquire new skill sets. So technology is going to evolve, but you're going to remain the same. So your desire to learn and to pick up new skill sets. And then now there's LLMs, right? It's like what, like, have you, something I've tried to do is I've tried to build projects using that, right? I've instead of just using ChatGPT, can I look at, you look at the API and then build a project using that. And that's something you could do. That's something anyone can do because the API is over there. And then you can build a project, try things out. And then at some point just realize, okay, maybe someone hire me to start using OpenAI's LLM, things like that. So just be excited about this new technology. Yeah, and then we don't know where it's gonna lead us, but yeah, hopefully it leads us to a good place.
Hmm. And I like some themes that keep coming up are projects, like actually doing the thing. What is your last piece of advice for our audience if you had to just do like a quick closer to leave them with, something you want to leave them with, a last thought?
Okay. Um, I would say, and I'm saying a lot of projects, so I'm gonna say something else.
Okay.
Uh, so something that you should, a last thought is, um, avoid, uh, and this is in all aspects of life, but keep it simple, right? And keep it simple, right? I was gonna say about over engineering, but it's still the same thing, right? There are a lot of things that you can do even while looking for a job, right? There are a lot of things that you can do to get a new role. There are a lot of projects you can do to get a job, but keep a lot of what you're doing simple. When I say this, I mean in terms of like, the projects you're working on. Like instead of working on something that will take you 1 month, work on like 3 different projects that'll take you a week. Keep it very simple. You learn
Mhm.
faster, you get more excited by completing things, right? So do something very small, right? Don't do like a large, elaborate project. Keep it small so that feeling of that dopamine, right? You get excited by working on things. So work on a small little project here and there. Yeah, it could just be running on your local machine first. Let it run, and then you grow from there. But don't try to do a big project because at some point you might get tired and you feel like you don't know it. Meanwhile, you're just working on a problem that may just be beyond you a bit. So yeah, keep it simple.
That's actually really in line with like how adult learning is actually successful, like smaller
Yeah.
doses, so then you incrementally feel like you're gaining the skills. Thank you so much, Wale. We have Celeste now helping us with questions.
Hey, yeah. Well, I feel like you all have already gotten so many of these questions answered, but yeah, thank you so much. This has been great. And I think you were coming in and talking about projects, and that was actually like where I was going to jump back in and say, hey, I've got a lot of students here as I'm reading through the Q&A. They're curious about projects. DataQuest is all about projects. Um, so yeah, I want to like just go back into like real world. So what are some simple projects that you think a beginner might consider kind of tackling? What would those things be? And what have you seen people sort of share on their resumes if for data engineering roles that are projects?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for asking. Uh, so the way I think about it is, for people who are transitioning into from something to something else, um, pick what you know. Like, what do you know? Like, what are you familiar with? So if you're familiar with, if you're in like if you like skincare, right? Can you work on some on a dashboard that shows like the best, there's some free, I'm sure there's some open source skincare data out there, can you get it from like some open source API into a dashboard, right? That is a good, interesting project. Are you curious about Formula One, even like, or about soccer? Like soccer has a lot of data. Are you curious about fantasy football, right? That is what you are excited about. That's what you're curious about, and then you want to see, for example, the rate of, like, say soccer, for example, who has scored the most goals in recent years, or who has, any kind of question that you like, right? There's a data out there. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of soccer data. So it is, you can build a simple pipeline, right? Like the way I think about pipeline is, if you understand Python, right? Think about, okay, what does it take for me to get data from this place? Do I need like to register? Do I need API keys? And then get the data. What does that pipeline look like? Do I need to make airflow? It might just be a Python script, something that, not complex. And then what does it need to ingest into this place? So BigQuery, for example, has like very free tier infrastructure data warehouse that you probably don't even need to pay for, right? And also, actually, BigQuery has free open source data that you could use. So they have like data that you can just go on BigQuery. You see a lot of open source data that they house, and then you can just use it to test stuff out. So that is a sample of project, right? Follow your curiosity, be curious about, whatever you're curious about, just look for open source, something out there that you can take. Also, you can scrape. That's a bit more, advanced, right? But it's still learning, right? At the end of the day, you could scrape, for example, a website that you're curious about. There was something I did a few years ago where I scraped a news website because I was comparing two different music artists, and I wanted to know, I can't remember the question I was trying to answer, but I was curious about two musical artists, and I scraped data from there, and then scraped it, and then pushed it somewhere else. I think it was BigQuery. Something else I've done in the past was YouTube, right? I've worked with YouTube as well, being able to transcribe the data and then convert it to, and then used, I don't remember what I did, but I think I did like some search thing or some NLP stuff on that data. So there is YouTube, there's a lot of information out there that there's a lot of places you can get free data. So you don't need to, data is free available. So yeah, I would say like, those are places that you could get data from.
So follow your passion, and then think about, okay, what kinds of pipelines and things that I can create. So when we're thinking about building a portfolio for a data scientist or a data analyst, we're thinking about, here's my analysis, where a data engineer is, here's your playground, right? I got it ready for you, and showcasing your ability to do that for others.
Yeah, and for like a data engineer, the ad party is showing your work, right? Obviously, I've not mentioned things like GitHub, but obviously you have like things like GitHub, and then you're able to show your work. But also you could just, something that is underrated that I used to do earlier is write, right? Like I write about my projects on Medium, right? I write, okay, how I and I write my project, and then at the bottom or at the top, I put my GitHub, so that anyone that can read the project, find it interesting, and then click on the GitHub to go there. So when you do a project, you write about it, tell a story, right? And then And then so people can think, oh, okay, actually this person um, could also contribute to my team. If, for example, someone's looking for a data engineer, but they're also looking for someone that can be also quite analytical, but someone that may be business savvy, that can speak to stakeholders. So those you've kind of like that's kind of it's called proof of work. You've proven that you can do some of these things at your job. So yeah, that is things that I'll say you could do.
I love that data storytelling, because this is a definition that I think people have a very narrow understanding of, but the real definition is something different in my mind that really brings a lot of value here. And that is the data storytelling is what I did to give you this number, what this number comes from, where it is not what does this number mean, where I think that a lot of people want to jump to what does this mean? Like, what should we sell more of? What should we discount? But the data storytelling is that. So yeah, give me a little bit more. How do you do that? How do you make sure stakeholders really understand what the limitations are of what you've built and where this data comes from?
Oh yeah. So when you say stakeholders, do you mean like whoever's reading, like whoever's
Whoever's using the data, yeah, the consumer.
Oh yeah, so you mentioned something about the work that we did to get
Mhm.
here, but also the data, right? So usually when you're presenting data to someone, like when you're telling a story, um, a lot of times the story you're telling is, and there's a book I read about like telling stories, right? Sometimes stories come in like a format where you're trying to say that, oh, like, it's like hero's journey, right? I have a problem and I went through this many challenges and I have a solution. And that's usually almost when you think about a movie, that's how it is. And that's how you want to think about even your story as a person or the story you're telling. You want to think about the movie. We had this problem and I went through the length and breadth of the world. I went through all the continents to come and to bring you to this place. And then you want to tell about the challenges we faced. Like this were the challenges we faced. This was this was what we did to overcome those challenges. This were we had to, do this and do that. And then you're speaking about those challenges and I'm saying, oh yeah, at the end of the day, you have this, but the story is actually the journey is actually the journey of getting there, right? And so when you're telling a story, right? So usually when we're presenting stuff at work, right? There's depending on your audience, right? There are some like audience where you want to like, present, oh yeah, like this is just what we have done. And usually those are like for, upper level, you just want to go straight to the point. But at some point, you also want to say this, you want to give a brief understanding of what went into it, right? You want to say, like, actually, we did XYZ, right? And that is also part of the story. And then when you want to show your work, so for example, if, about writing an article, back in the days when I used to write, like, when I write articles now about, some of the things I'm doing in my project, right? I'm not necessarily like I have an hypothesis, right? Why does XYZ happen, right? And I'm writing about why all the things I did to get there. My hypothesis may, I may not actually prove, my hypothesis may not even make any sense, but it's the journey that takes me through trying to understand the theory, like understand the question that I had is what matters. And people are like, oh, okay, I understand that question, and then people resonate with that. So I think that's the asking the questions and telling me how I went through answering that question is very important. And that's what people need to do.
I love it. Kishana, do you have anything to add there from your own personal experience?
Nothing to add. I feel like Wale's answers are always so comprehensive.
And I've done the same thing that I always do. I got really involved in listening, and now I don't know the next question that I'm going to ask.
Oh, there's a whole section there.
Yeah, we have a lot of folks who are asking about applying for new roles and getting your first role. So I know it's been a little while since you've had your first data role. That what advice do you have for people getting started in the industry, being creative, thinking about kind of that first role, whether it's starting in analytics and then moving to data engineering or applying for a data engineering role?
Oh yeah, sure. I love this question because there's no one path. I'm sure that everyone got into the industry in different ways. But yeah, I agree. Like you need to be creative. But also you need to show that you need to show like I said before, proof of work. You need to just show that, oh yeah, I've been curious, I've been here, I've been spending time understanding technologies, I've been spending time understanding stuff. And is a mix of a lot of things, I would say. But I would say that the first thing that I would do right now is work on my portfolio, a lot of things that kind of signals that, oh wow, this person is interesting. Like, I have a personal website, maybe write about some of the things you're doing, because I know a lot of people, are like, on data camp, on CareerQuest, on Udemy, on you everywhere. There's a lot of learning that you've done, right? And those learning, write about it. Create a GitHub profile and just share, right? And then usually when you do that, you're trying to tell recruiters that, and a hiring manager that, I'm curious. I'm a very curious person. I'm trying to, I've learned a lot of stuff. And then something else that I would advise people to do now is just get in the door, right? Your first role may not be a data engineering role. It may not be a data analyst. It may never be a data analyst role, right? It may be some role that you're using data, but the title may not be data analyst, but you're actually using data, right? So get in the door and then be that person that does the data analyst work. Be that person that does the data science work, right? Be that person that does the dashboards, be that person that does, because again, what happens is you get into a role, but a lot of the tools that I use at my job, I may not have known them. Even right now, a lot of the tools I use at my job, I did not know them before I joined. So yeah, you're gaining knowledge as you join. So get in the door, and then you just realize the day to day you're picking Databricks, you're picking Spark, you're picking, and then at the end of the day, just realize, I know all these things, and then you're ready for the next role, right? So get in like, if it's a business analyst role, and then you know that, okay, I'm going to be doing some Excel, some SQL, right? By the time you're done with that role, you're going to be really good at SQL because you're going to be doing it every day, right? And then while you're doing SQL, something might come up, Python. Okay, I'm going to get into that role. Now I'm really good at SQL and I'm adding Python to it. And then now I'm really good at SQL and Python. So get in the door first, get into that first job, and then just start, growing from there.
I love that. So showcase your curiosity. Don't just say it, but show it through your projects and your portfolio. I know you said this earlier, learn foundational skills. I know you said SQL and Python. Any other foundational skills? Well, and cloud, learn a cloud tool. Anything else to add to that list?
I'll say things like Excel. Excel may be required or not. I don't know, depending on the role, but it's just good to have, like, you don't want to be that person. Yeah, you don't want to be that
Like
person.
the oldest thing ever, right? Like Excel, who needs that anymore? It's still the most widely used
but you don't want to be the
in the
person.
world.
Yeah.
You
don't
gotta
want to
know
be the person at the job that doesn't know Excel, right? So yeah, like learn some Excel and then some dashboarding. There's a dashboard tool called Looker Studio that's, I think, open source. Just create dashboards. And then usually, depending on the role, you might have to get deeper. You have to learn like things like Terraform, for provisioning infrastructure, things like, Databricks, things like Spark, things like those tools. You kind of build off of the foundation, right? You build on top of it. So yeah, and yeah, very important. Cloud. I think everyone is on the cloud now. You want to join a team and then be the guy that understands like a lot of this cloud tooling, right? I think that's very underrated, right? Learn, try to use a lot of the cloud and then understand them very well, so that just, even though you don't know like the foundation or understand like cloud.
So I know that that's going to be really specific to whatever role you get at whatever company. For a beginner, what cloud tool would you recommend starting with?
I recommend.
Just pick one. There's no.
I would say so. So it depends, right? If most companies use AWS, I think Azure for more corporates. If you think that you might get into like a big corporate, like Fortune 500 type place, then Azure. Most of them use Azure. But just if you're very much startup-y, maybe GCP and AWS. But I would say that if you just want to get started, GCP has, I think, a $200 credit that allows you to play around with things without paying. So GCP might be the best place to go because you can just play around, turn on things, turn off things, and not pay for it, at least for a bit. So play around with GCP because it is free for at least up to $200, I think.
Free is great. Free is great. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I know we shared in the chat the link for the feedback survey. I am sharing this again. Please let us know how this was helpful for you, and share additional questions for the future. And yeah, thank you both so much again. This has been so informative, and we're really grateful for your time today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much.